Is racial discrimination wrong?
Pretty straightforward question. Notice the long pause.
Senator, our Constitution prohibits race discrimination, discrimination on the basis of race.
Okay, let me ask again.
Is racial discrimination wrong? A pretty simple question that I think most of us can answer. In fact, it's pretty easy for me to say, yes, racial discrimination is wrong. I thought that was how Americans thought. I thought that was how we lived our lives. However, in this next clip, apparently not. A judicial nominee gets grilled by Ted Cruz about a very simple fact. Can you say that it's wrong to discriminate along racial lines? And she will not say yes. It's fascinating. Let's get into it.
Is racial discrimination wrong?
Pretty straightforward question. Notice the long pause.
Senator, our Constitution prohibits race discrimination, discrimination on the basis of race.
Okay, let me ask again. Is racial discrimination wrong?
Senator, as a judge, I don't deal with issues of morality or whether something...
So you have no views on whether it's right or wrong?
Guess what? I don't deal with issues of morality in my profession either, specifically, but I can say pretty clearly and easily, yeah, racial discrimination is wrong. It goes against everything we stand for.
Well,
Senator, because that is an issue that is frequently litigated before the courts, pursuant to Canon 3 of the Code of Conduct.
okay, so why does the Constitution prohibit racial discrimination?
Senator...
You'll also notice every time she answers, she leads with Senator, and then usually some long preamble beating around the bush. This is all a tactic to eat up time because Senator Cruz only has like, I think, 5 minutes, and they know this. And so anything they can do to stretch it out when responding to these questions, they're going to do it. Simple yes or no answer is all it takes. You don't have to say, Senator, as you know, blah, 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 blah. No, just yes or no. Simple stuff.
I think it's part of our Constitution and this nation's history of aiming for equal justice and treating people, regardless of any protected class status, equally and fairly.
So discriminating based on race violates, I think you just said, our Constitution's history of aiming for justice. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
Senator, our case law, if you're talking about race discrimination under the law, yes, pursuant to Supreme Court precedent, race discrimination under the law is prohibited.
So you and I are both graduates of the Harvard Law School. We were there at the same time. I don't think we crossed paths.
We did not.
As you know, our alma mater is currently before the Supreme Court for its longstanding practice of discriminating against Asian Americans.
So if you guys don't know about this, basically a lot of the elite institutions in America, specifically the Ivy League institutions, were caught discriminating against Asian Americans basically because they're too successful. They do too well based on merit, and it's one thing to raise the standards for them, which is also wrong, but they're actively precluding them from admissions because they do so well on tests and extracurriculars and all the meritorious things one would look for in an applicant, that they've been caught red-handed excluding Asian Americans simply for the fact that they're Asian. Already Asian Americans have to get higher standardized test scores than Black Americans or white Americans or Hispanic Americans, etc. And I mean, this is blatantly wrong, right? Most level-headed, fair-minded people will say, yeah, that's wrong. If you do well, if you get the scores, if you work your butt off, you should be admitted. But that's not what they're doing.
And many top universities across the country have vicious discrimination policies against Asian Americans. They are reminiscent of the quotas against Jews that we saw these same schools impose in the 1950s. These schools believe that Asian Americans have been too successful academically, and that if they allow students to compete based on merit, they'd have too many Asian Americans.
And I know this for a fact firsthand because I attended UC Berkeley for graduate school, UC Berkeley's not an Ivy League, but it's probably the top public university in America, academically speaking. It also happens to be a bastion of leftist thought, which was an interesting experience for me during that period of time. And while I was there, it was so obvious that Asian Americans were extremely overrepresented in the student population. And that is because they do very well based on merit. And look, you might want to have some perfect picture of diversity where every group is represented exactly in the student body as they are in the population. But the fact of the matter is, there are a ton of Asian Americans who do way better than white Americans on tests, and they should get in, period. So it's just crazy. And another thing before I play the rest of this, it's very interesting to me, guys, that Republicans are painted as being the racist, bigoted people by the mainstream press, by and large. Look, when I was a graduate student and I wasn't really politically involved, I just sort of bought the mainstream narrative, hook, line, and sinker, spouted off talking points. Yeah, the Republicans are the racists. You see the exact opposite. Here you have Senator Ted Cruz saying, hey, look, this racial discrimination stuff is wrong. Can you admit to that? And you have a Democrat judicial appointee not even able to say racial discrimination is wrong.
Accordingly, Harvard and Yale and a number of other top schools in this country explicitly and brazenly discriminate against Asian Americans. Does that practice concern you?
Senator Cruz, as you know, the SupremeUrt recently granted
the answer
cert
should be yes.
in the case to which I think you're referring.
Just yes.
And therefore, pursuant again to Canon 3, I am
Okay, so you're going to decline to comment, so let's not talk about that case, but let's talk about what you've written. You know, I have to say I was astonished. Senator Grassley asked you about this article you wrote in law school, and your response was, well, gosh, I haven't read that. In my experience, when people are nominated to be a judge, they do some preparation. Did you not reread it in preparation, or did the Biden team tell you don't read it because you don't want to answer questions about it?
Senator, I read it, but again, the question that
She told Senator Grassley that she had not read the piece that she wrote back when she was in law school. And now she's telling Senator Cruz that she read it. Right there, just caught in a lie. It's amazing that we allow this stuff to slide.
Senator Grassley.
Okay, good. So you read it, so let's talk about it. I've read it sitting here, and I find it stunning. Look, there is a pattern of this administration nominating political activists and radicals to the bench, and they've done it for a year. And it's highly concerning. So I'm looking at what you wrote, your words. You described, quote, the Reagan presidency represented the pinnacle of the counteroffensive launched by the guardians of the status quo. In the face of institutional resistance, activist movements redirected their focus from liberation to survival. Do you believe there was a threat to the survival of Asian American groups under President Reagan?
Senator Cruz, again, that was a law review, book review.
I'm just asking if you agree with the sentiment. You wrote it.
Senator, I don't recall.
Do you agree with it now?
What we were thinking.
Do you agree with the sentiment now? Not what you were thinking then. I'm not asking your state of mind then. I'm saying, do you agree with the words you wrote?
This is actually really common as well. They'll be confronted with something that they published, whether it's a article or a tweet or something like that, where they're clearly stating an opinion and they get confronted about it, and then they deny and they dodge, and they'll usually default to, I'm not sure what I was thinking then. Senator Cruz does a good job of keeping her pen down and saying, well, I'm not asking what you're thinking then. I'm asking, do you agree now with the statement that you made then?
Senator, again, I don't know what our purpose.
So I don't want your purpose then. Today, as you listen to the words you wrote, do you agree with them, or do you think I was wrong?
Senator, without the complete context.
Okay, let's read a little bit more then. You talk about the neoconservative view, and here's what you define an Asian neoconservative. as someone with an opposition to racism, so that's good, but a commitment to ending affirmative action programs. And you write, quote, the neoconservatives' narrow vision of success currently threatens to impose divisions within the Asian American community and among different ethnic groups. Emphasizing personal achievement and success as measured by the status quo, the Asian American neoconservative fails to acknowledge the shared history of oppression and then ties their individual success to the survival and liberation of all oppressed peoples. Judge Kato, as I read this, what you're saying, and if you will permit me to use a more common vernacular, you're saying that to be sufficiently woke, an Asian American must support policies that discriminate against Asian Americans.
That's absolutely correct. So basically what she was saying in that article is conservative Asian Americans are not racist, as he acknowledged, that's a good thing, but they're opposed to affirmative action, and that's a bad thing. So she's saying if you're Asian, you should support affirmative action, which is a policy that hurts Asians. And by the way, in case you guys didn't notice, Kenly Kato is Asian.
I got to tell you, that doesn't make sense. Is my reading of what you wrote incorrect?
Senator Cruz, again, we are talking about something that I wrote when I think I was a 23-year-old law student. But do you agree with it today? I'm not asking what you thought then. I'm saying today, as you sit here, as the Senate is considering you for a lifetime appointment as a judge, do you agree with what you wrote that Asian Americans, to be sufficiently liberated, must support discrimination against Asian Americans?
Boom.
Senator, without the complete context of that particular quote that you've excised, I cannot give you whether my opinion today, whether or not I agree with what I said as a 23-year-old law student. I would have to review the entirety.
But you said you did review it before this hearing, right?
Got her again.
Correct?
I reviewed it briefly.
Oh, no, I reviewed it briefly.
This was quite some time ago, over 25 years.
This is so weak.
It's about 6 pages.
I co-wrote it with a classmate of mine.
Senator's time has expired. Senator Rona?
Absolutely crazy, guys. If you can't see the hypocrisy and the evasion of answering questions and the clear fact here that she was saying, even though you're Asian in America, you should support affirmative action, which absolutely is detrimental to Asian Americans because they're too successful, so they get excluded from admissions, then you're not liberal enough, essentially. And this whole tactic of saying, I can't really speak to what I was thinking then, I'm not sure, I need the full context, I don't know, it's completely whack, for lack of a better term, because he's saying right now, do you agree with the statement that Asian Americans should support affirmative action even though it hurts them? And she still keeps defaulting to, well, I don't know, Senator, it's been a long time since I wrote that. That doesn't matter. I can tell you right now, look, I didn't write the article, but I can tell you that affirmative action that discriminates against Asian Americans because they're too successful based on merits is wrong. I don't need to have written an article when I was in law school to say that. And I don't need to be a judge or someone who wrote that article in law school to say that racial discrimination, full stop, is wrong. Why can't these people just say that? I'd be interested in you guys' comments. Let me know down below what you think. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to react to. As always, I greatly appreciate if you could like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, all that fun stuff that helps people see this channel more. And until next time, everybody, I love you. Keep your minds free.